Kia ora. Today I'm going to talk about food sovereignty and food security. So food is kind of like the basis of life. It has a big influence on shaping any culture. And when you have a food system that's driven by human greed rather than human needs, you end up with imbalances and problems with food security, ecological sustainability and food access. Here in Aotearoa, we're pretty lucky to be living on an island which has pretty fertile soil and a mild climate without extreme cold or hot seasons, and with a high annual rainfall, which means we have the conditions to grow both temperate and subtropical crops. And our surrounding waters are pretty rich in marine life, so you'd think that being blessed with this kind of environment we should all be thriving, but that's not the case. The reality is we have some real issues with access to affordable, healthy, organic food, and the majority of people don't even grow their own food. And our more deprived communities, it's even worse, because you see gardens with like nothing but grass, and people don't own their own land, and they're totally dependent on the market system, on supermarkets, takeaways, and the large food corporations. We also have more and more people accessing food banks, and it's not just the homeless ones, it's normal working families that are struggling to keep up with the high food prices, high housing costs and general costs of living. And so this kind of predicament really shouldn't be happening in a fertile agricultural country like this. To understand why it's ended up like this, you need to look back at our current agricultural sector and how it was established. So after being colonised, our whole country was pretty much cleared of its original rainforest and turned into pasture to supply the British Empire with wool, lamb, beef and dairy products. And I guess the only thing that's changed today is that Britain doesn't hog all our products anymore. They're exported all over the world, but according to statistics, 72.5% of all agricultural land here is used for monocrop livestock farming, which is not really an efficient use of land, because if you want to farm cows, for example, each cow usually requires about 1.8 acres of land, and if you use the same amount of land for like a biodiverse mixed crop agroforestry system, which are like multi-strata vertical growing systems, then it's a much more efficient land use system, because it requires a lot less space to produce a whole lot more food, as well as producing medicinal plants and resources with no irrigation or chemical or fossil fuel inputs, and without the negative environmental effects that often go with livestock farming. 95% of all our dairy products are actually exported overseas. 94% of all lamb is exported. 87% of all beef is exported overseas. And there's a similar pattern in our fisheries industry, with over 90% being sent abroad. And only like 4% of our farming land is used for horticulture. So in effect, this country is still kind of functioning like almost like a colonial economy, with most of our produce being siphoned overseas and the locals being left with the crumbs, and the crumbs are unaffordable anyway, so we end up having to buy cheaper, inferior quality food imported from overseas. This is not only a social problem, but it's also an environmental one. Like I said, clearing land for sheep and cattle farming has resulted in the destruction of our native forest and 90% of our wetland areas. And the whole country has basically been turned into like a giant paddock with eroded hills and stuff. So ecologically, our lands here are just not really suited to grazing, and because if they were, we'd have native savanna grasslands everywhere, but we don't. So when you remove forest, especially from hilly areas, as well as destroying the biodiversity, it makes the land susceptible to erosion, to flooding, landslips, and when you combine that with landfilling wetland areas, you're removing an essential element in the whole ecology of the watershed system, because they play such an important role in preventing erosion and filtering nutrients, controlling floodwaters and sequestering carbon, and as well as supporting biodiversity. Back in the colonial days, Indigenous land management systems were viewed as inferior and backwards, and that viewpoint probably hasn't changed all that much, but I guess they've just put different labels on them, like permaculture or syntropic agroforestries and so on, so that sounds more sophisticated, but Indigenous agroforestry models are actually very efficient, very effective and sustainable systems. They can produce a whole variety of food and resources in a much smaller area of land, and they're not only economically more sustainable, but they also promote diversity, biodiversity, and they don't require chemicals or fossil fuel inputs. The garden I'm in now here is a good example of an Indigenous agroforestry system based on practices brought from Hawaii, and that were kind of applied all throughout Polynesia and the Pacific Ocean. If you're keen to become more self-sufficient, or at least ease the pressure of growing food prices and just general living expenses, you don't need to wait for governments or scientists or corporations to change things. Real change starts with yourself. Just get out there, start planting, get rid of that useless lawn which you can't eat anyway, and start growing your own plantation. A lot of people are a bit put off gardening because they think it's too hard or too much work, or it's just easier just to jump in the car and just buy your stuff from shops. But if you do it the Indigenous way, it's actually not that hard. It's probably best to start small and just gradually build up, because it takes a few years to get to a stage where you're actually self-sufficient. And like even then, you don't have to be fully self-sufficient. At least you'll be able to ease the food expenses, or to grow stuff that you can't get in the supermarkets. And your garden yields will just keep multiplying over time, and you'll find yourself becoming less dependent on the supermarkets. We kind of live in an economy of greed, inequality and scarcity, but nature actually does the opposite of that. It creates abundance. Every plant produces either seeds or offshoots which can be propagated out to create even more plants, and before long you've got even more than you need, so you can give them away to other people. If you've grown up eating takeaways and processed foods all your life, then you probably might want to just gradually wean yourself off that diet, but after a while you'll definitely feel the health benefits of eating a more natural diet. And some of the healthiest and medicinal foods you can eat are actually weeds, and you don't even have to try growing that stuff. Starting a garden will also definitely help if you want to decolonize what you put in your mouth, like junk food and alcohol, drugs and all of that stuff, as well as changing your lifestyle. You don't need much land to actually grow your own food, and even if you don't have any land, you can still join or start a community garden or marae-based marakai, or even start planting out your booms, those wasted spaces in front of your property that councils expect you to mow. Just the more food that you can grow and harvest, the more you're going to be breaking those chains of market dependence, and I guess undermining the whole market system in the food industry, because you're kind of no longer enslaved to it. And that's when you know when you're on your way to building food sovereignty. So yeah, that's it. Mauri ora.
El lápiz de